Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today, we're going to talk about unemployment and unemployment rate, how we measure unemployment rate, and what effect does it have on the economy. Now, before we talk about unemployment, we first have to talk about what we call adult population. Now, I'm going to put adult population in quotes here because it means something different when it comes to the labor force. An adult population, at least when it comes to working conditions, is anyone over the age of 15 is considered to be a part of the adult population. Now, we measure employment and unemployment of this group of people. So if someone is 14 years old and working, they're not considered to be part of the adult population. If somebody is 50 years old and working, that person is definitely, and someone 50 years old is part of the adult population, and we would like to know their employment status. Now, in the US, there is an organization, a government entity called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or we can go BLS in its acronym, that measures unemployment rate in the US every month. So every month this organization, BLS, releases a report that tells us how is unemployment rate looking for the US. Now, how does it calculate it? The BLS basically samples from the population, from the US population, to find out the employment status of individuals aged over 15 years. So BLS basically takes a sample from the US population, sends them a survey, asks them questions, and then and from that survey, the BLS figures out what is the population like, who's working, who's not working. Now, based on the result of the sample, there are three groups that are basically categorized by the BLS, or if it's another country, it's their statistical agency that does that. One is what we call the employed population. These are people who are working part-time or full-time. So they could be working 10 hours a week or 5 hours a week or at least 1 hour a week, and they will be considered employed. You could work full-time or you could work overtime too, and of course, those people are also considered to be employed. Now, there's also other people who are considered to be employed even if they don't get a wage. So working part-time and full-time in wage employment, definitely you're considered to be employed. Now, there are individuals, let's say if you are a family worker working in a family farm or a business without pay, they are also considered to be employed. So basically, if let's say your parents own a small shop and you work at the cash register a few times a week, then even though your family is not paying you directly, you're still considered to be in the employed population category. The next group is what we would call unemployed group. This is people who do not have a work or who do not have a job. So they don't have a job and they have been actively looking for work in the last 4 weeks. So basically, unemployed population, not only do they not have a job, but they also have to actively look for a job in the last 4 weeks. Now, here's a side note. If you don't have a job currently and you have been looking for one last week, then you are considered unemployed. Now, the third category, and that will answer another question, is that what about people who are, who have looked for a job like 6 weeks ago? What about them? For those people, we will say they are not part of labor force. Now, one side note here is this up here, side note. So the sum of the employed population and the unemployed population is called labor force. So employed population plus unemployed population together is what we call the labor force. Now, however, there's a third group of individual, which we call not in the labor force. These are people who are not working and are not actively looking for a job. So that's where we come to the other definitions that, let's say someone is not working and looked for a job, let's say 6 weeks ago, they would be considered to be not in labor force. So 4 weeks is a very strict cutoff. If you don't have a job and you looked for a job within the last 4 weeks, you're considered unemployment. Once, if you looked for a job 5 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago, then you're not considered to be unemployed. You're considered to be not part of the labor force. Now, there are other individuals who are not part of the labor force. We have full-time students. So many people are they are students full-time, and so they are not actively looking for a job. So they are considered to be not in labor force. If you're retired, the definition of labor force, as we said, is anyone above the age of 15. So if someone's 70 years old and retired and don't want to work anymore, they are considered to be not in labor force. And then there are people who are stay-at-home parents, basically people who are taking care of their children or taking care of the households. They are not actively looking for a job. Even though they are working within their house, they are not considered to be working for pay, and so they're not considered to be in the labor force. Finally, another category is basically someone like this. We call these a person discouraged workers. They are also they are considered to be not in labor force because they haven't been actively looking for a job. Now, how do we measure all this data? What is unemployment rate? How do we measure all that? So when we are talking about that, we need to look into some equations. So first is, as we said, labor force equals employed population plus the unemployed population. Now, another important measure or macroeconomic value that we are very interested in is called the labor force participation. This is basically equal to the labor force divided by the adult population times 100. So labor force participation rate tells us what proportion of the adult population is either working or is actively looking for a job. So basically it's telling us what proportion of the population wants to work or already has a work. Now, unemployment rate is going to be, let's insert another equation here. Unemployment rate, this equals to the unemployed population, so the number of people unemployed, divided by, it's not the adult population, it will be the labor force times 100. So we are not looking at the proportion of people in adult population that's not working. It's basically the proportion of people within the labor force who really wants to work but who can't find a job. They are considered to be that's the proportion of people we use to find out the unemployment rate. Now let's look at an example to see how do we calculate unemployment rate. Let's go to Google and let's just write the employment situation. So let's look at the employment situation. This is of June 2022. So let's click on this and we have our data here. So let us make this. So here we have the numbers. Okay, so the civilian labor force, this is the labor force that we have. So here's one example, 8 million. So now let us find out the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate. So the labor force participation, we write it as LFP rate. It equals, it's going to be my labor force, which is going to be 164 million divided by 263.8 times 100, which comes out to be 62.168%, or we can say it's around 2.17%, or around. Out of all the adults in the US, 62% are working or are actively looking for a job. So this is what we know about our labor force participation rate. The next number that we should find is the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is, it is the unemployed population, which is 5.9 million, divided by the labor force. So we have this number. Now, if you notice one thing, the employed population and unemployed population together equals to the labor force. So if I add 158.1 plus 5.9, this becomes around 164 million, which is the labor force. So this number is that number. So the unemployment rate is, okay, I have 5.9 million people unemployed out of a total of labor force of 164 million times 100, which equals to 3.6%. Unemployment rate, why do we really want to see unemployment rate measured every month? Well, unemployment rate is a barometer about the health of the economy. So it's telling us how the economy is doing. If unemployment rate is low, it means that the economy is doing well. However, another number that we need to look into, it is the labor force participation rate. So if this number is falling, and unemployment rate remains steady, that's still not a good thing. So if LFP rate is steady or rising and unemployment rate remains slow or falling, then the economy is doing well. Unemployment rate. So we can see, what does unemployment rate look like in the US? And this is what it looks like. And this is what it looks like. So as we see during recessions, unemployment rate goes up. During good times, unemployment rate goes down. And right now, we see for every month, we see the unemployment rate. It actually shot up during during our pandemic that we just faced in 2020. So it was up to 14.7 in August 2020 or April 2020. And then it fell, and it keeps on falling after well into 2022 and 2023. So this is what the unemployment rate looks like. The other times when unemployment rate was very high, as you can see, is around in early 80s and sometime during the Great Recession during 2009. So from that table, we can see unemployment rate is not equal to zero even in a booming economy. So even if the economy is growing really fast and everything's great, unemployment rate is not equal to zero. And this is mainly because of two reasons. One is called frictional unemployment. This is when there are more jobs than workers available. So there are more people trying to hire people for work, but not enough employees are willing to work. So in this case, if I'm an employee and I know that there are a lot more jobs available, then what happens is potential employees become choosy and search more for jobs with the best fit. So you won't take the first job given to you or offered to you because you know that, there's so much jobs available. Everybody's hiring people, so I may as well wait to get a better job. So this is one of the reasons we see, even in the best of times, unemployment rate is not equal to zero because people want to find the job that they like the most. The other reason is called structural unemployment. This is where there are not enough jobs available because the industry is declining. This is when we see that some industries may be disappearing from the country, or the industry is not doing so well. So if you imagine, let's say, like the steel industries in America, in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, there was a decline in the employment of in steel mills because a lot of them were shutting down and a lot of people were made unemployed. Now, if you were very skilled in a factory that produced steel and all the other steel mills are closing, you will not find a job in your industry. So you have to retrain and go into some other industry. That's where some problems come in. There's also, as you see that with these two types of unemployment, frictional unemployment is a good kind of unemployment, I would say, because, as an employee, you know that you have better options available, so you can shop around. But in structural unemployment, you don't have the option to shop around because the job that you're really good at no longer exists. So you don't know how, maybe that job was well paying and now you don't have a well paying job available. So you either need to retrain or if you can't find a job, you become discouraged and you basically stop working and you move out of the labor force. So what are governments do help trying to help people match with good jobs. So job matching is important, and in a lot of places universities do that, companies do that, governments do that. They hold job fairs to help people find jobs. There are job retraining programs. So many community colleges offer different trainings and like in different kinds of trade jobs that help people quickly move from one job to another if they lose their job or if they have become structurally unemployed. Finally, there's also unemployment insurance. This is basically what the government, so that if you lose your job, you don't immediately fall into poverty. The government insurance program that pays you a part of your salary for a certain number of weeks so that you can find a job that best fits your skill. So let's say if somebody loses their job, then they can apply for unemployment insurance so that they get a part of their salary. So it's some proportion of their salary every week or every month for a specific number of time. It's around, I believe it's 26 weeks maximum. So basically you can use that time to find a better job or to find a job that's best fitting your skill. You don't basically have to take the first job offered to you. So hopefully this helped in understanding what is unemployment, how do we measure unemployment, why unemployment is never 0%, and what can governments do to help people find jobs. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you at a later video. Goodbye.